Just recently, from the Vatican in Rome, this news release was given from the official Vatican newspaper, and I'm quoting that of date May 19, 1960, Tuesday, stated that the Roman Catholic hierarchy had the right and duty to intervene in the political field to guide its flock. The newspaper rejected what is termed, quoting, the absurd split of conscience between the believer and the citizen. However, Observatore Romano made it clear that its stern pronouncement was valid for Roman Catholic laymen everywhere. It deplored the great confusion of ideas that is spreading especially between Catholic doctrine and social and political activities, and between the ecclesiastical hierarchy and the lay faithful in the civil field. Pope John XXIII recently gave this statement according to the St. Louis Review, date of December 12, 1958, quote, Catholics may unite their strength toward the common aid, and the Catholic hierarchy has the right and duty of guiding them. Question, sir. Do you subscribe to the doctrine of mental reservation, which I have quoted from the Catholic authorities? Do you submit to the authority of the present Pope, which I have quoted from in these quotations?
Well, let me say in the first place, I've not read the Catholic Encyclopedia, and I don't know all the quotation which you're giving me. I don't agree with the statement. I find no difficulty in saying so, but I do think probably I could make a better comment if I had the entire quotation before me. But in any case, I had not read it before, and if the quotation is meant to imply that when you take an oath, you don't mean it, or if it's proper for you to take oaths and then break them, that it's proper for you to lie, if that is what this states, and I don't know whether that's what it states unless I read it all in context, and then of course I would not agree with it. Secondly, on the question of the Observatore Romano article, once again, I don't have that in full. I read the statement of last December, which was directed to a situation in Sicily where some of the Catholics were active in the Communist Party, but I'm not familiar with the one of May 1960 that you mentioned. In any case, the Observatore Romano has no standing as far as binding me. Thirdly, the quotation of Pope John of 1958, I didn't catch all of that, and if you read that again, I'll tell you whether whether I support that or not.
Pope John the 23rd only recently stated, according to the St. Louis Review, date of December 12, 1958, quoting, Catholics must unite their strength toward the common aid, and the Catholic hierarchy has the right and duty of guiding them.
Yes.
Do you subscribe to that?
Well, now, I couldn't describe guiding them in what area. And if you're talking about in the area of faith and morals, in the instructions of the church, I would think any Baptist minister or congregational minister has the right and duty to try to guide his flock. If you mean that just by that statement that the Pope or anyone else could bind me in the fulfillment, by a statement, in the fulfillment of my public duties, I say no. If that statement is intended to mean, and it's very difficult to comment on a sentence taken out of an article, which I have not read, but if that is intended to imply that the hierarchy has some obligation, or has an obligation to attempt to guide the members of the Catholic Church, then that may be proper. But it all depends on the previous language of what you mean by guide. If you mean direct or instruct on matters dealing with the organization of the faith, the details of the faith, then of course they have that obligation. If you mean that by that, under that, he could guide me, or anyone could guide or direct me in fulfilling my public duty, then I do not agree.
Thank you, sir. Then you do not agree with the Pope on that statement.
Gentlemen, now, you see, that's why I wanted to be careful, because that statement, it seems to me, is taken out of context that you just made to me. I could not tell you what the Pope meant unless I had the entire article. I would be glad to state to you that no one can direct me in the fulfillment of my duties as a public official under the United States Constitution. That I am directed to do to the people of the United States, sworn to an oath to God. Now that is my flat statement. I would not want to go into details on a sentence that you read to me, which I may not understand completely. I think my statement is quite clear.
Gentlemen, we have time for one more question, if it can be handled briefly.
Senator Kennedy, Robert McLaren from the Westminster Presbyterian Church here in Houston. You have been quite clear, and I think laudably so, on this matter of the separation of church and state, and you have answered very graciously the many questions that have come up around it. There is one question, however, which seems to me quite relevant, and this relates to your statement that if you found by some remote possibility a real conflict between your oath of office as president, that you would resign that office if it were in real conflict with your church.
No, I said with my conscience.
With your conscience.
Yeah.
In the syllabus of errors of Pope Leo IX, which the Catholic Encyclopedia states is still binding, although it's from a different century, is still binding upon all Catholics, there are three very specific things which are denounced, including the separation of state and church, the freedom of religions other than Catholic to propagate themselves, and the freedom of conscience. Do you still feel, these being binding upon you, that you hold your oath of office above your allegiance to the Pope on these issues?
Well, let's go through the issues, because I don't think there's a conflict on these three issues. First issue, as I understood it, was on the relationship between the Catholics and the state and other faiths. Was that the...
No, the separation of church and state.
Yes.
He explicitly considers
Well, I
an error.
support that. I support that. And in my judgment, the American Bishop Statement of 1948 clearly supported it. That, in my judgment, is the view held by Catholics in this country. They support the constitutional separation of church and state, and they are not in error in that regard. So I just want to finish.
The second was the right of religions other than Roman Catholic to propagate themselves.
I think that they should be permitted to propagate themselves, any faith, without any limitation by the power of the state, or encouragement by the power of the state. What's the third one?
The third was the freedom of conscience in matters of religion, and this also, in point 46, I believe it is, extends to freedom of the mind in the realms of science, but this is part.
Yes, well, I believe in freedom of conscience. Let me just, I guess our time is coming to an end, but I believe in it. Let me say finally that I am delighted to come here today. I don't want anyone to think, because they interrogate me on this very important question, that I regard that as unfair questions or unreasonable, or that somebody who is concerned about the matter is prejudiced or bigoted. I think this fight for religious freedom is basic in the establishment of the American system, and therefore any candidate for the office, I think, should submit himself to the questions of any reasonable man. My only objection would be, my only limit to that would be that if somebody said, regardless of Senator Kennedy's position, regardless of how much evidence he's given that what he says he means, I still wouldn't vote for him because he's a member of that church, I would consider that unreasonable. What I consider to be reasonable and an exercise of free will and free choice is to ask the candidate to state his views as broadly as possible, investigate his record to see whether he states he believes, and then make an independent, a rational judgment as to whether he could be entrusted with this highly important position. So I want you to know that I'm grateful to you for inviting me tonight. I'm sure that I have made no converts to my church, but I do hope that at least my view, which I believe to be the view of my fellow Catholics who hold office, I hope that it may be of some value in at least assisting you to make a careful judgment. Thank you.
We're going to, gentlemen, shall we remain standing?
You have been watching Senator John Kennedy appearing before the Greater Houston Ministerial Association in an unrehearsed question and answer period. The telecast of this meeting was sponsored by the Kennedy-Johnson Texas Campaign Committee in behalf of Senator Kennedy's candidacy for the presidency of the United States. Through the facilities of KTRK-TV, this has been a special Texas State Network program.